And you're listening to A Little Too Quiet. It's been a minute since I've done a podcast, Mary Grahame.
It's been well...
Yeah, hold on.
Was it perhaps last year?
It was last year, but it was like... It's been weeks.
Yeah.
Sorry, you're listening to A Little Too Quiet, the Ferndale Library podcast. It's brought to you by the friends at the Ferndale Library. I know how to do these intros. How are you, Mary Grahame?
I am doing really well, Jeff. I just got back from vacation.
It's so good to see you.
So I had a nice little brain break.
Great.
And I got up this morning and I was like, do I want to leave my cat? I do not. Do I want to see the people I work with? I do, because I work with the best people.
I know.
So I overcame that internal struggle.
Yes,
and
the struggle.
I made my thermos of coffee and here I am wading through so many emails, but delighted to be back and refreshed.
Back and refreshed for another set of our podcast where we talk about intellectual freedoms. If you're a regular listener,
Which, man, you need to be refreshed for, because woof.
I think we've done about 5 or 6 or 7 of these. I've really lost count, but hopefully you've been a dedicated listener who has heard us mention this phrase, intellectual freedoms, more than once on this podcast. And I think right after the very most recent episode of these that we did, right after it, Mary Grahame and I traveled west to Kalamazoo to a conference, statewide conference, the Michigan Library Association annual conference, and we got up in front of people and
we were 2 theater kids. Fun fact, listener, if you poll a lot of your friendly local library workers, especially if they work in children's services, you will find a lot of former theater kids.
Oh,
and
yes.
The energy put off by my and Jeff's presentation was extremely theater kid.
Yeah, and I was thriving. I was just feeding off of it.
Yeah, we were having a great time.
We were having a great time, but that is compliments to my partner here. I really appreciate you and your energy, Mary Grahame, and also just everything that you've brought to these podcasts too, especially about intellectual freedoms. For anyone who's just hearing us talk about this for the first time, Mary Grahame, could you just give them a little bit of an intro about what that concept means?
Yeah, of course.
And why libraries care about it?
It's only a cornerstone of a free society. So intellectual freedom is the right that all people have to read, but also interact in other ways beyond reading with a variety of viewpoints on a variety of topics. And when I say a variety, I mean like all of them, basically, not just like 3 or 5, like all of them. And part of the mandate of public libraries, and to an extent public school libraries, because as famously put forward in Tinker versus Des Moines, students do not leave their First Amendment rights at the school gate. One of the main parts of the mandate of these public libraries is to foster intellectual freedom. And so that is why we collect materials on a huge variety of subjects from a huge variety of viewpoints.
Yeah.
And there sure are some people out there that this makes them mad.
Yeah, and so you kind of just hear bits and pieces of this coming through the news every other week. I think if you're in library world, you probably hear about it every other day, but you do hear it in the headlines. It was, what was it, maybe September, October, November, it was revealed that 11 people were responsible for thousands.
Like the vast majority of challenges.
11 people were responsible for more than 60% of the challenges in the country. Just 11 people and their little angry desktop computers.
Is an ongoing trend. I very much recommend the nonfiction book Algorithms of Oppression, which I believe covers this in part. And I'm so sorry that I can't remember the author's name right now.
It'll be in the show notes.
But also, if you have watched the multi-part Harry and Meghan documentary, which I did not plan to watch all in one go, but absolutely did. They also talk about this. Like, they talk about the vast majority of people on Twitter who were saying horribly racist things about Meghan Markle were like, again, but a handful of people on Twitter, like fostering this terrible environment.
Yeah.
So it's part of the playbook. But yeah, anti-intellectual freedom and pro-censorship has been, I would say, the major moral panic in the United States of the past 2 years.
That's right. And so the gist, I guess, of our presentation in October, too, when we went to Kalamazoo for our little conference, was we were kind of hoping to help libraries, which is what we've been trying to do here on the podcast, because we're talking to you, dear listener and dear library patron, helping other libraries kind of communicate the, I almost said severity, I guess I should say severity of the situation to their own patrons, you know, kind of beyond library speak, like communicate the gravity of the situation. What's at stake, really?
And also let their patrons know what they can do.
Let their patrons know what they can do, and also not have it be so gloomy and so doomy, if at all possible. And also kind of to expand upon that is like, why is your librarian in a fight? You know, why is your librarian fighting censorship? Because that's part of the job.
Yep.
And that is what we've also kind of always tried to do on this podcast, is to let you know that there's more to this job than wearing cat eye glasses and shushing people.
I do neither of those things.
You do neither of those things, right? Which is the preconception, right? And I mean, not to toot our own horn, but I thought it was a really worthwhile presentation.
People were very nice to us at that presentation. During the questions section, most people gave the only acceptable form of more of a comment than a question, which is just that they, you know, told us that they were already familiar with the library and everything we've been doing, and that they were big fans. And that was very kind. And it was neat to talk to people from all over the state. That's the joy of the state conference.
Yeah.
And including from people who, you know, they would say what library they were working at, and we would be like, whoo, how are you holding up?
Right.
Like, you know, it's, I mean, again, we've talked about, we've been relatively fortunate at Ferndale that our problems have been there, but have been few and far between. And we have an extremely supportive community who, as soon as those problems go public, go, how many copies of that book do you need?
How can I help?
How can I help?
Yes.
So we have not been stuck in anything protracted.
Right.
That has not been the case.
Right.
Unfortunately, with many libraries across the state.
Right. We've been lucky, but we also have been in the headlines for
reasons.
Behaviors connected to this terrible trend. And yeah, just to go back about tooting my own horn, it wasn't so much that I was like, gosh, wow, we're great. It was more like the longer I worked on this presentation with Mary Grahame, the more I realized this is big.
It is.
Like we're humbly presenting on it, but like this is a big topic.
Yep.
And there's a lot to unpack.
Yes.
And I was like, wow, this is like an important thing that we're talking about.
Yeah.
So I took it very seriously, despite how, you know, we were very energetic, and we were trying to break the tension, and we were kind of like, you know, just being a little quippy within reason. But like, yeah, I took it very seriously. It was a big deal.
I did an entire semester class on intellectual freedom in graduate school. And I mean, we could have done 4 semesters of it, because there's so many directions you can take it in. We talked about privacy rights. We talked about hate speech. We talked about the law. Like, that class really did make me want to take a class not on law librarianship, but on the law in libraries, especially public libraries, because I did find it fascinating. I'm a huge privacy nut. Ron Swanson, no grid.
Right.
And something that but is one of my favorite parts of my job is being like, how can I keep other people out of your business?
Right. Yeah. I used to work at the circulation desk, and we couldn't, just more often than not, this is what you would encounter. You couldn't reveal to even you, Mary Grahame, what you had checked out.
Because we've deleted it. Yeah.
And then I would say, they might say why, and I would say because of the Library Privacy Act, which may or may not sound like a thing I just made up in the back of my head and gave you.
It is real.
But it is a real thing.
It is also tied to the history of librarians resisting the Patriot Act.
Right.
And the quippy thing that I like to say is that deleting the records of things you have checked out and then brought back is easier than the FBI showing up saying, hey, what has this person been checking out? Us setting the documents on fire in front of them and then saying, sorry, officer, I'm afraid I can't find it. It's just faster to be like, we don't keep those.
Right.
And a lot of people I do find, okay, privacy soapbox, here we go, is that people are like, oh, I have nothing to hide. And it's not about not having anything to hide. It's about just, you quite literally have the right to live your life unobserved. And as we live in more and more of an encroaching surveillance, not just surveillance state, but surveillance everything, that gets harder and harder. And the library is one of the last places, where not only are those rights protected and enforced, but we tell people that they have them.
Right.
Like, it's very important to me. I actually wrote my final paper for that intellectual freedom class on the privacy rights of minors in public libraries, because I knew I wanted to work with children. And I think I'm often the first person who tells them, if they have their own card and their parent has a question on it, I'm like, you need to bring your child over here because they're the only person I can discuss this card with.
Right.
That makes me very happy.
Yeah. And so we delivered this presentation, and lots of people came up and said, hello. And one of them happened to be, his name is Matthew Lawrence, and he was like, hey, I heard you guys mention the Patmos Library.
Yeah.
Which is in Jamestown.
Jamestown Township.
Way over on the west side of Michigan. I'm holding up my palm, even though you can't see
but
it.
We're both doing the classic Michigan hand map move.
Almost to that area where Michigan is kind of sitting on top of that Indiana, Illinois. You've got the mitten map. It's over there. Patmos Library obviously had quite a dramatic last couple of years. And Matthew Lawrence is actually at the Herrick District Library. He is the former director of Patmos Library, but frankly, a also passionate defender of intellectual freedoms. And he was like, hey, great presentation. You guys mentioned you had a podcast during your presentation. If you ever want me to come on, I'd be happy to. And we're gonna have him on the podcast. So stay tuned for that. Presentation that we did
previously on the West Wing
at MLA, the Michigan Library Association annual conference. And you came up and said hello, and you were so nice to say, I'd love to be on your podcast one day. And we clearly held you to it. I don't know why I was compelled to say, why would you give us such an opening, Matthew? You knew we would take that. What?
That's absolutely okay. I'm glad to talk about it. It's a very unique situation that occurred.
Yes.
And I'm more than happy to talk about it.
Well, we're going to get to that, but could you just chit chat with us a little bit about yourself? Like, how'd you get into the library world? How'd you start?
Yeah, so I originally got into libraries because I wanted to be an archivist. So I went to Grand Valley for my undergrad. I originally, I wanted to teach, and then I realized I didn't want to be a teacher. So then I started to just study history. And then I eventually started working in the archives on campus there. And I really enjoyed it and decided that was kind of the career that I wanted to do. So I started attending graduate school. I went to Dominican University. And while I was there, I started a job at Patmos Library. And once I started kind of working more in a public-facing role, I realized that I really enjoyed talking to people. When I worked at the Grand Valley Archives, I loved it, but it was a lot of it was very separate. It was a lot of basement work. I worked in the basement, and it was kind of
I was going to say no windows.
Yeah, and it was funny because I worked there as kind of an intern for a little bit before I was a research assistant. But when I worked there as an intern, I didn't realize that there was a second person downstairs with me until a few weeks later, because both of us just never saw each other. It was completely dead quiet down there.
That's
so it was
spooky.
Yeah, it was they showed me where her office was, and I was like, she's been here the entire time. All right. But I mean, I still really have a passion for archival work and stuff, and that was kind of what I got hired at Patmos to do, was that they were looking for someone to do local history as well as adult services. But once I started doing that public facing role, I realized that that's kind of more what I'm called to do. So then I kind of adjusted out of just strictly like archival electives and stuff when I was at Dominican to be more broad and more like public service work. And then that's when I started working at after Patmos and everything, I got a job at Herrick District Library as a public service librarian. So now it's kind of something I do full time.
Ooh, after Patmos and everything.
Yeah.
Why don't we just, hate to put you on the spot too, Mary Grahame, and share with Matthew here, how did you get into libraries? Maybe our listeners want to know too.
So I
What's your road here?
went to Wayne State for undergrad. I'm from Detroit, in the east side of the state, and did not see a reason to leave. And I knew I wanted to be an English major, because I was like, ooh, you read books and then they give you course credit for that. That sounds sweet. But I knew that I did not want to be a teacher also, because I was too close to all of my English teachers in high school, and I saw the stacks of paper that they would take home. And also I saw some of my classmates that they had to teach. And I was like, no, I'm not doing that. I'm not getting up at 6 a.m. anymore. So I started thinking about that Avenue Q song, what can you do with a BA in English? It turns out nearly anything, but I decided to be a librarian, and I had been a camp counselor both for day camps and sleepaway camps, and I knew I liked working with kids, and I liked reading children's literature, and I was like, well, if I get a job working with kids and children's literature, I don't have to stop reading children's literature. And again, you read books, not necessarily on the job, but you talk about books and you do arts and crafts and they pay you for it. So so I went to Simmons University out in Boston for my graduate degree, and then came back and got a job here. And there were a ton of archivists at Simmons, and I knew one or two people who thought that they were going to do public librarianship and then took like a cataloging class, and they were like, never mind, leave me with MARC records so I never have to speak to another person again. And so it's nice to hear like the flip side of that, of like, where did the people go?
Where did the people go? Where are the windows?
That was exactly what it was too.
Yeah, and I mean, I like desk work is one of my favorite parts of the day. I love sitting at a desk and people coming up and asking me things.
Yeah.
So yeah, we share that.
I'm gonna ask a question that I don't want answered yet, and then I'm gonna be radical and ask an interruptory question. But I would love to hear from both of you when your formative moments of when you realized just how important libraries are, just how valuable they are, kind of that whole, I didn't realize that we are stewards and guardians of intellectual freedoms. We'll get to that, but Matthew, we do just have to ask, like, what the hell happened? What was your view of things over there in Patmos? What was that experience like for you? And I guess share, if no one has ever really heard of it, tell them what happened.
Yeah, so I worked as I had the kind of funny role title of being an adult librarian. My wife always thought it was funny because she asked if there was like a kid librarian. I was like, yeah, but they're like the youth service librarian. They're not a child.
Right.
But I worked there for about probably 8 months prior to when things started to get a little ugly. In my time there, leading up to the departure of the previous director, I just did it was a lot of desk work. It was I did programming. I got presenters to come in every so often to do things, but sometime around, it probably would have been sometime around February of 2022, things started to change there a little bit. There started to be some kind of rumblings at what used to be unattended board meetings. I was the only person that was there as part of the public, because I didn't have to be there. I enjoyed seeing the process of it, and I enjoyed kind of having a dialogue with the board, and being able to like answer questions if they had any questions. Otherwise, I would be the only person that was there. And in like one instance, my wife was there with me, but that started to change kind of come, I think it was around February of 22, when people were made aware of the book Genderqueer that was on our shelves. It was in the adult section on our shelves, so it was an adult nonfiction.
Interesting.
And that was when things started to get a little rough. Well, not a little rough. It was when things got rough.
Yeah.
Um, at that time, what used to be quiet board meetings started to quickly devolve into shouting matches, accusations of pedophilia, um, accusations of like grooming, um, and just a lot of very loaded culture war type words. And eventually, I mean, that was wearing on everyone, but eventually, people started to come in. At least on one occasion, someone came in actively looking for like a confrontation. Um, with the director at that time, I encountered people asking about my sexuality as though it was just a regular conversation, and then kind of accusing me of being gay and having some kind of agenda for why I want these books on the shelf. But eventually, our director at that time found new employment, and I became the interim director. And at that time, I got kind of thrown straight into that as well. It was the stuff that she was experiencing herself as the director. And then as the interim director, I was kind of the face of that during the board meetings. So uh, things got really ugly.
Yikes.
I was there as interim director for about 3.5, probably about 4 months. I actually wanted to have the directorship position there because I thought that there was something, I mean, I thought there was something noble about it, about trying to help. And that I later found that, I mean, for one reason, it wasn't necessarily a gainful, it wasn't something I'd have been able to do to support my family. But I think that it also just wasn't a healthy place for me to work at.
I think that's something that librarians often, and this of course is like a very clear-cut and extreme example, like we run up against that, right? Of like, yeah, it is this, noble, like Jeff loves to talk all the time about, we're providing information to the public and things like that. And also, like in that case, standing up for something that is like, this is a book, people. Like, you do not have to choose to read the book, and please get off the internet and touch grass is what I would like to say to a lot of people.
Yeah,
but like, if you can't live on the wage, you can't live on the wage. And also you have to think about yourself. And it's not, it's not bad or selfish to think like, oh, I don't want to, be roiled with anxiety going into work every day.
Right.
That's a completely normal thing to not want.
I think that was what was shocking to me, was the lack of dialogue. When I was at these board meetings, I hung out after the board meetings, and there were a handful of people that would come up to me and be like, hey, I want you to understand that this isn't like a personal thing. There's nothing like that we feel, or at least that person that was talking to me, who was definitely one of the more moderates of the people that would come to those board meetings. He came up to me and kind of was like, hey, I disagree with this, but I want you to know that this isn't something that I'm holding you personally accountable for. It's just something that I want to talk about here. But I think that of the 3 or 4 board meetings that I attended as the interim director, I think that happened once. And these were board meetings that would be attended by what used to be just me, eventually ballooned to 50 plus people. And I think I can count on one hand the amount of times someone actually came up to me after the board meeting to kind of have a dialogue like that. And I think that was what was also upsetting and kind of changed my opinion on what my position is there, was that it was less, I'm in a position to enact, or I'm in a position to have this dialogue and kind of advocate on behalf of both myself and my staff, as well as the library as a whole. And it turned into more of they don't want to hear what I have to say. They just want to say what they have to say and be done with it, or be very, very public and very, very vocal about what it is that they have to say, but not have a dialogue about it.
I'm trying to not say the word mob rule in that kind of, it's very upsetting. I did want to get back to that. For me personally, I've been working in libraries for so long, and I've talked about this on the podcast. I've seen Banned Books Week come and go. And I was like, oh, right, because people thought Slaughterhouse-Five was kind of radical. They didn't want that in schools. All right, so we're going to read it here. But it really didn't start to be driven home for me until the My Right to Read campaign really ramped up and Mary Grahame started doing these podcast episodes. And so that's when it hit me. For you two, going through library school, working in libraries as librarians, and even for you, Matthew, were there any other moments where this started really becoming clear to you how big the mission of a library really is? Things like that, Mary Grahame?
Well, I made the firm decision to go to library school the day after the 2016 election.
Oh, yeah.
It had been like in the back of my mind of like, maybe this is what I'll do after undergrad. And then the 2016 election happened and I was like, welp, we are suddenly going to need even more people who like work at telling factual information from crap. And I was like, I can be one of those people. And then when I was in library school, I took an intellectual freedom class.
Oh, cool.
Which was fabulous and very, like, we just went in depth in so many different facets of that. And like research into hate speech and how much does the regulation of hate speech actually like functionally work. Like we studied the laws in other countries and things like that. I wrote my final paper on the privacy rights of minors in public libraries.
Ron Swanson.
Yeah. Yeah, I do like to joke that all of those Parks and Recreation episodes where Ron is like, no grid, are secretly about me. I'm like, they don't need to know that. It's too much information. So I think that I kind of had an awareness of it going in.
Yeah.
And then, so I graduated from library school in May of 2020. A great time to be searching for a job in a public institution. But when I started working here in August of 2021, it's not that I like felt like, oh, something's on the horizon, but I was kind of looking around going, if something did happen, where would it come from? And there's a particular organization in Ferndale, although I've heard they're going to have to sell their office building.
We've heard that too, yep.
That I sort of had in the back of my mind about like, well, it would probably be them. And then in June of 2023, I was right. And so it's not something that I thought I was going to like see this much of when I got, like I wasn't like, I'm going to library school to join the fight for banned books. I thought I was going to library school to join the fight against fake news, which is also true.
Sure.
But I mean, yeah, I think when everything kind of like when I started to see like the headlines about Patmos and things like that, it was one of those moments of like, oh, library school did prepare me for this, actually.
Yeah. And then Matthew, how do you feel about that? Like the entire state of Michigan, if not most of the nation, was kind of like looking in your direction. You were at ground zero for this kind of thing. But before you answer that, did everything Mary Grahame just expounded upon, was that stuff you had already picked up on before you were at ground zero? Or was the experience of it really what drove home the importance of libraries protecting intellectual freedoms?
I think so I went into libraries because I wanted to help people. And I have a great interest in like media studies and like information literacy and those types of skills. So what I was looking for, let me say that when I went to school, when I went to library school, this wasn't something that was necessarily on the forefront when I was there. Even graduating so I graduated in April 2022, and when all this stuff started to happen, when all of this stuff started to happen in like earlier that year, that was the first time I really encountered that. I mean, we talked about it a little bit during school where it's like, these are the things that have happened in the past. People have found books objectionable. And it's our right to ensure that even if something is offensive to some person, that they have the right to read it. Someone else has the right to read it. Nobody gets to decide what is and what isn't kind of acceptable when it comes to things that are legally published. So it was kind of talked about more in the abstract. So it wasn't, I wouldn't say that I was necessarily prepared for it, but it was something that was definitely like a seed that was planted. Like I knew that things happened in the past. A nearby town of Zeeland, Michigan was kind of on the forefront of the schools that didn't want Harry Potter in the school libraries when those first came out, and kind of required, I think they required like a parent signature or some type of adult consent. So it was something that I knew happened, but it was like, I mean, at that time I'd have been pretty young, and definitely not in school. So I knew that it happened in the past, but this was the first time that I ever saw like a tangible example of what that looked like. And I think that it was shocking to me in as much that it was less about the books themselves and more about a certain rage against an entire power structure that these people that wanted these books banned kind of interpreted in the world. And I think that was the other thing about it too, is that when we got these book complaints, the complaints themselves would be for rather like petty stuff. I was eventually told don't even not don't review the books, but don't defend each specific point of a book. Just defend the fact that someone has the right to read it, which I think is fantastic advice. Because what was happening was that I was getting these complaints about very specific things. Like, I can't remember the specific book, but on one page there was a traumatic car accident, which could be objectionable. On another page, there was a poster in someone's bedroom that said Black Lives Matter, which promoted critical race theory. And it was like these really small nitpicking type things, but they were always directed at specifically books that had LGBT plus characters in them, or not even had like an equitable, like not even had it was really, yeah, the only books that we ever had complaints about were those types of books that had LGBT plus characters. I know that a lot of people in our field saw complaints about Toni Morrison books and things similar to that, as well as like books like Kite Runner and stuff. But at least for Patmos, it was entirely those types of books.
You got a crash course. You hadn't really fully anticipated it or grasped it yet. You were literally at ground zero for it all. So
yeah, and that was still that was even prior before I had my MLIS. So when I started there, I got hired because I had like a graduation date for it and everything. I was in courses for it.
What a whirlwind.
By the time, it was interesting too, because by the time that I graduated, I was actually writing papers and using certain pieces of what my day-to-day work was like as part of like my portfolio, or like my defense or whatever. It depends where you go to school, what they call it. But that was also an interesting point, was that I could use that while I was still in school.
I remember doing that when I was in school too. So that paper that I wrote on the privacy rights of minors, I was working in Massachusetts at the time, which has a very strict, if you have a library card, even if you are 5 years old, I cannot tell your guardian what is on that card unless you give me permission. And the law is not quite that strict in Michigan, but I think I did a comparative, I knew I was coming back to Michigan to work, so I looked up the laws here and did a comparative thing, and thought, and I've been thinking about that a lot in this whole like storm of things, because so often what we hear is those horrible accusations of like pedophilia that are completely ungrounded and have nothing to do with how that actually works or how grooming actually works. But it very much comes from this place of like, protect the children. And I grew up with friends who the way to protect them was to not tell their parents what they were looking at the library. Like, they would have gotten in trouble, they might have been in danger, and it wasn't about like, let their parents protect them. It was like, that my friends needed to be protected from their parents sometimes. Right. And so it was interesting to me, like using some of the stuff that I came up against, like in work life, and applying that in library school stuff. But you have one of the more extreme examples I've heard.
Yeah. Matthew, I always have considered this little podcast that we've been able to do a quasi form of social media as a way for us to reach the patrons that are listening to us. And so we've always been trying to tell them about this, trying to keep them informed so that we can hopefully avoid that scenario where it is just yelling at the board or yelling at the librarian, and instead actually hopefully even a dialogue. But it's not so much that we're saying, hey, you patrons out there who already love the library, you should be ready to stand up and fight for us. I think we're more so just asking, do you, patron out there listening, think censorship is bad? Because if you do think it's bad, you might want to tune into all of this.
Yeah. Can we interest you in?
Can we interest in? You might want to check this.
I'm wondering, Matthew, and I imagine that you've given this plenty of thought, because I also got into libraries because it's like, oh, I want to help people, and sometimes, you know, that means telling the kids where the Penguin books are, but also sometimes that means like someone who's having a really bad day. Like we see adults all the time back in youth too. So like maybe being like the one easy thing that happens to someone having a bad day, or, you know, maybe trying to be as helpful as possible to someone who doesn't speak English very well or something like that. And something that's been very difficult for me with this whole like wave of everything is when people are so cruel to library workers, and it's like, I am a person, you know, these are all people. Right. You don't get to treat people that way. That's like, I thought we agreed in kindergarten that wasn't allowed. But then for me, there's this added sting of like, I'm here to help you. And like, I'm going to do it. I'm going to tell you where the books you want are. But like, dude, you know, this kind of like, I'm here for you. Stop yelling at me.
Yeah, man. Yeah. And you know what, Matthew, we wanted to get on this podcast and say that we appreciate you.
Thank you.
Doing a good job
doing this.
But that is another thing that we like to say is that it's not librarians need to hear that. Let's face it.
All library workers do, I think.
All workers.
Yes. Yes.
Baristas, line cooks.
Yep.
Here, PSA for being just a good human and
be nice to people.
Be nice to everybody.
That's the PSA.
What we do also tell our patrons is, you know, if you do want to do something, you probably, and you do support the library, you should go tell the board. If the board hears that, that's good. Or show up when it's time for that millage. And unfortunately, things went south for Patmos, even though they've kind of ticked slightly north, albeit with a compromise. But they were defunded, and then about 5 months ago, their millage was renewed with the stipulation that they put sort of descriptions all over their books.
Yeah, it's my understanding that it's sort of like descriptions, content, but it's like pulled from like Amazon,
right?
It's something like that. I should admit I don't have a whole lot of contact with the people that I worked with there anymore. But
completely understand.
Were you gone? When did you switch over? When did you go to Herrick? When did you leave?
That would have been
ish.
That would have been around June or July of 2022.
Okay.
Yeah. So it wasn't long after. I was actually fielding the position to be their full-time director at Patmos at that time, and then this came up here, and I decided that I wanted to go for that. But yeah, it would have been around. I think my first day here was July of 2022.
I think. It is literally distressing. It is distressing to even say that move in and of itself in the heat of that year was the better move simply for your mental health. That any library worker would have to, it's distressing.
Yeah. And I did, it wasn't, I don't want to give the impression that it was so much that they wore me down, but it was a multitude of other factors. I got married later that year as well, which played a big part in the, like, not just looking at my finances for myself, but I mean, it was also, there came a point where it was clear that the library no longer had the support of either some of the board or some of the members of the board, as well as the township board. And I think that was really the kind of the turning point for me, was that if it was just some of the patrons that were doing this, I think that I would at least hope that it would have had less of an impact on me, because it's like, I see them once. I mean, granted that some of those board meetings were honestly like literally traumatic, but they happen infrequently. They happen once a month. And If I had kind of that support from the township, I think it would have been completely different. But once we started to have the township supervisor, our liaison to the township, other members of the township government itself speak out against the library, or members of the library board participate in kind of these defunding campaigns, then it really started to be like, this isn't even if these people stop talking, this is a reflection of a deeper rift between the library and the township that isn't something that can just fully fall on my shoulders to repair.
Absolutely. And I think that is a great opportunity for a public service announcement to our listeners. Find out how your library board is put together in the municipality where you live. In Ferndale, we have an elected one.
Yeah.
I live in Detroit. We have a banana pants system that makes no sense. But I don't directly elect my home library board. But wherever you are, if you have an elected board, vote in those elections. Run for those elections. Figure out.
Particularly if you love the library.
Particularly if you love the library. If you don't like the library, why are you listening to this podcast? But if you love the library, a lot of boards, the only requirement is you live in the place where the library is.
That was how it was at Patmos. Yeah. Was that it was an elected board.
Yeah, and you just got to live there. If it's an appointed board, figure out who appoints it and say, hey, the next time you're appointing people, you know who's interested in that. Because a lot of times it's hard, it's weirdly hard to fill these seats. And you don't want them filled by people who are ready to be loudmouths about how much they hate the library, the place that they help run. That is thumbs down from me.
Yeah.
And, and I completely understand why that was the turning point for you of what? The people who passed the budget have decided that this place is going to be forced to not live up to the whole reason it exists.
Right.
And I guess, hopefully, on a positive note, how are you now, Matthew? How's everything going at Herrick District Library?
Much better. I'm
glad to hear
happy.
it.
Yeah, I'm very happy here.
That's great.
I think that I don't want to speculate, but I think that the size of Patmos made it a much easier target for certain things like this.
Yeah.
There was one full-time staff member there, and it was the director. Well, I was the interim director. I was part-time. I was working 30 hours a week. And then there were about 4 other staff members there, 2 of which were librarians. There was a youth services librarian, and then there were 2 other librarians that did kind of each their own section of the library. And then there was just people that helped run the desk and helped shelf and everything. And everyone that worked there was averaging 20 hours a week. I averaged 20 hours a week when I was there before I was the interim director. And I think that just the relative size of the library made it extremely easy to, one, become really personal when it comes to these attacks, or when it came to complaints about the library. It became really, I think that that's probably one of the reasons why it became so ugly, was that it was super easy to single out the people that work there and to really just bully them. The benefit of here is that we've got a community relations department. We've got a great relationship with our community as a whole, which is fantastic. I think that the makeup of the library when it comes to that stuff is major too, because I think that it was so easy to strong arm other librarians there, in just terms of being harassing, in a way that I don't think is possible at a larger institution. I'm not saying it's impossible. I think it's completely possible, and I've seen it, at least at other institutions in our country, in our state, I should say, when it comes to more township library relationships. But in terms of being able to single out and come into the library with the explicit reason of picking a fight with someone, it's not as easy at a bigger institution.
As Mary Grahame has pointed out, intellectual freedoms covered under the First Amendment.
Yeah, that's a pretty
kind of a big deal.
Part of what it's there for.
It's, we're just...
Yeah, and I was shocked at how little people recognize that.
Or conveniently ignore.
Yeah, because I know a director who's closer to us here at Ferndale, and she's in the Metro Detroit area, and she's had a lot of success with her sort of talking to community relations and doing sort of the more old school Republican clubs, like the very, when people say, oh, what happened to the party of personal responsibility? Like, these are the people who are like, oh, we're the party of personal responsibility. And she would go to them and be like, the First Amendment, like, this is about the First Amendment. And, like, do you want the government picking what's on your shelves? Mm-hmm. And she had a lot of success with them being like, actually, no, we don't. And then being on the library side. Mm-hmm. But yeah, I think Jeff, in a lot of cases, it is just the let's conveniently ignore that part. And I don't think I had realized exactly how small Patmos was. I knew it was small, but I didn't realize that it was that small. And I think you're absolutely right that it does, like, even, Ferndale is not enormous. We have one building and one floor,
right?
But we have 25, 30 people on staff now. And you're right. You simply can't come in, and when most folks are in the back office, you can't come in and pick a fight the way that you can when there's 4 employees,
right?
Right.
Well, I'm glad that Herrick is treating you well and that you've got, such good community relations. So do we here. And I just find that makes everything easier.
Yeah. And we also sincerely appreciate your time in coming on this podcast, because Mary Grahame and I have been making these podcasts for a little while, and I think every single episode...
We did a Patmos update in like every episode.
Every single episode, if not for like a second or 2 minutes or 5 minutes, we would always just kind of chat about Patmos, and maybe people listening to this podcast are like, okay, well, secondhand from these two Ferndalians, but we really appreciate you sharing the experiences to really drive it home, distressing as it is. To end on another even positive note, I think anything coming up at Herrick that you're excited about? You got any events over there? What's going on at Herrick?
We're actually going through a huge renovation right now.
I can see some people working back there.
Yeah, there's folks in hard hats.
Whoa.
But yeah, that's the most exciting thing we've got going on here. We're all really excited for it. So we've got this space that I'm in right now is, as of right now, our only fully enclosed study room. So we had 3 fully enclosed ones. 2 of them are in the construction zone on the south side of the building. So this zone behind me is the new construction zone. But when we're done here, we're going to have 10 rooms pretty similar to this one across this entire section that they're working on behind me. 5 of them are going to have televisions. So we just started getting into renting out like Nintendo Switches and things.
Sweet.
So we saw a lot of success with those, with the fully enclosed study rooms prior to the renovation. People check them out. We had one that had a television in it. And we saw people from literally all walks of life, in all facets of our community come in, play Mario Golf, Mario Kart, just relax, warm up, cool off. That's one thing I'm super excited about. We're moving our maker space from downstairs to the main floor here, and it's going to be probably about 4 times bigger. And it's going to have like a nice open layout so that people can kind of just walk in, see how everything works. If they know how to use a machine, they can jump on it. If they don't, we can help set them up with one of our coordinators to help get them started on what they want to do. So that's super exciting. And that's, I think, speaks to a lot of like what I love about the library here is that our community, I don't have the exact stat on me, but I know that more than half of the people, at least as of last time, I think more than half of the people the last time we did these numbers have a library card in this area. And that's huge. Yeah, and
that is huge.
It's not just huge that we get to see, that we have like that number, but I see a lot of people here from either it's, homeschoolers, people that are unhoused that are just looking for a place to hang out. We have a great outreach community with Community Action House here. They're here 5 days a week and they help set people up with all sorts of great opportunities. And or just like casual readers, people looking to do research, people from Hope College coming in to do schoolwork. Like we have such a large swath of the community use our services and tell us how much they enjoy using them, that it's really encouraging when we can do things like this renovation now, which is going to get so many more people involved in what we're doing here, even what we're doing here outside of the books. So like with the maker space, with the study rooms, with our library of things, all of that stuff, I think it's kind of a two-way street where it's like we can show off all of the support that we have, but people then get to support us even more because they get to use all these cool things.
That's exactly it. That
Library
is fabulous.
as a space.
Yeah.
It can fit so many community connections in this. Yep.
Yeah.
We love it.
A new renovation is so exciting. I was just visiting Boston and got to visit the library I worked at in grad school, which had done a huge reno since I've been there last. And so everyone was showing me, they were like, look at this big space we have for story time. And like, we have our own microwave downstairs. You don't have to go all 3 floors up to the staff lounge. And I was saying things like, we have a fridge now, as though I still worked there. Like, it's renovations are so exciting. So congratulations on that.
Yeah.
And Jeff, you know what I'm thinking?
What?
Field trip to Holland.
Yeah. We'll come your way.
Yeah, when it's all done, we'd love to have you here.
Great.
Even if it's no cameras or anything, you just want to see the area, we'd love to have it. If you want to give us a
cross-state
shout out,
solidarity.
Well, maybe we could,
got here.
on our way to Traverse City for MLA, we'll make an L shape and we'll just go straight and then up. So I don't know.
Yeah, anytime. Just give me a heads up. We'd love to have you here. We can show you the behind the scenes if the renovation is still going on. They just got yesterday. So the youth service, we're 3 floors here. The youth services department is upstairs. I don't get to see up there a ton during the renovation because it's just not around me. But yesterday they brought in part of this new youth services area is going to have like a little fairy garden that's carved out of a tree trunk.
Yes.
So I saw them unloaded. It was probably 5 or 6 guys like loading this giant tree trunk in here, but it's hollowed out. They're going to put little cool things in it. They're going to switch it around. We're going to use the 3D printer to put like different things in it. They're going to have a great space up there too. There's a lot of exciting things happening here.
Jeff, write down that we need a fairy garden.
Yes.
I'm asking for one at the next staff meeting.
I was just going to say.
That's
amazing. We have a little
amazing.
outdoor one at our north branch, but I think this is going to be, it looks really cool. I mean, it's like a straight up like sculpted from like a tree trunk, like sculpted out, hollowed out so that you can put all this stuff in there. It's got little windows on it. So like you can put the things in there, but nobody can like kind of like dig around in it.
Yeah. Oh, that's fabulous. So listener, like think about how happy we've been in the last 5 minutes talking about renovations and nice community people, and go vote for your library millage and work on getting great people on your library board so that librarians can spend more time going, did you know we have a fairy garden, and less time going, stop being mean to us about the books, please.
Yeah, you support the millage and you get Nintendo Switch, Makerspace, renovation, fairy garden.
Yeah, and nice people who are happy to see you and literally whose job is to give you a hand.
Yeah, or
and that's like the big part is like, even if you're just going to come in here and use like our computers, nothing wrong with that.
Yeah,
like,
that's literally what we're here for. Even if you're just here because there's a free water fountain.
Yeah,
even if it's like the lowest like rung of needs, like you just need me to tell you where the bathroom is. We're glad to have you here.
Cool.
You're like talking to people. It doesn't matter if it's like real in-depth stuff or anything. It's just like, I'm here because I like helping people in whatever form that looks like.
Yeah,
that's it.
And archivists and catalogers, we appreciate you too.
Yes, we do.
Matthew,
thank you for your service.
Thank you so much for joining us.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Have a good rest of your day.
For sure, yeah.
We'll keep you posted. And that was our chat with Matthew Lawrence from the Herrick District Library, and we so much appreciate his time. And anyone else out there who saw us in Kalamazoo, contact us. We have a simple little email. It's called podcast@fadl.org. Matthew Lawrence, as you heard, no longer with Patmos Library, but what is it, Mary Grahame? It's January now. 3 months ago, at least some good news. Patmos did have their millage renewed, which is crucial. Admittedly, there were compromises made on their behalf, but if the doors stay open, that's at least a bit of good news, because that was something that we did really have to wind up riffing on during our presentation. Again, to reference it, was that slippery slope of
Oh, everything you lose if the public library goes away.
everything you could lose if the library's doors are closed. And the reason I'm even like arched up like a scared cat right
Jeff
now.
is like curled in a ball.
The reason like the word censorship gets me so tense is that slope down to the inevitable conclusion of, oh, your library could go away. And something I've been talking to people a lot about more lately as a marketer, thanks also to the insights and energy of Mary Grahame, is that this isn't just the place with books. It's a place.
It's a place. Full stop. You can exist in public here without paying for anything.
You don't even have to check something out. We don't even care if, well, it would be lovely if you did.
We do care,
You
but
could also
like,
just
you don't have to.
come and sit down.
And no one's going to be giving you the stink eye about
just
like, when are you checking that book out?
hang
As
out
opposed to
because-
like, when are you going to buy that coffee? Because you're sitting in a coffee place.
I mean, again, full stop. We'd love it if you checked something out, but you could also just bring in your own book and just sit here and read, and no one's going to bother you.
If you work remotely, we have really good public Wi-Fi.
Bring your laptop.
I know a couple people who came here a few weeks ago to work remotely for the day,
Yeah.
and they were like, oh, this ruled. You can bring your own beverages as long as they are covered.
The value of the space.
The value of the space, but also I do want to say, you know, for someone who's, I do often find myself using the line of like, oh, it's not just books. It is also books, and they are free. Like, something that I do absolutely adore about libraries is that if you would like us to be dedicated to your entertainment, we can be dedicated to your entertainment. We have DVDs, we have books. You can check them out completely for free. I have canceled all of my streaming subscriptions, and I now exclusively watch shows and DVDs that I like, movies that I can get on DVD through work. A simple DVD player is $25 to $30.
But I could walk up to the desk and say, I noticed that you don't carry the 12th season of Doctor Who. Could you order it?
I sure can ask many of the other libraries that we are in a consortium with to send a copy right over. And so, I mean, it really is vast. And one of my favorite things to do on vacation is go to independent bookstores and buy books, and I had a great time. They are also expensive. That is like one of maybe 2 book shopping trips I've been on this year. But despite the limited book budget, I am able to be very widely read, not just because I work here, but because I got the library cards.
right.
So,
That's right.
yeah.
And yeah, just shout out in general to physical media, DVDs, Blu-rays, they're still here. If you are overwhelmed or even disenchanted by the proliferation of streaming, just come browse our shelves.
Yeah.
You'll feel like you're back at Blockbuster. Not sure what you're looking for? Ask us for a recommendation. But what if all that was gone? How scary would that be? You know, just so stark, so troubling. That'll do it for this current episode of Intellectual Freedoms. Thanks again to Matthew Lawrence from the Herrick District Library, and I think just, of course, a shout out to my partner here, Mary Grahame.
Woohoo.
A general shout out to all the librarians out there doing the good work.
And all the other library workers.
All circulation staff, pages, everywhere. All of you. And shout out to you for listening to another episode of A Little Too Quiet, the Ferndale Library podcast, which is brought to you by the Friends of the Ferndale Library. That's something you could join. Go to ferndalefriends.org if you want to find more information. Thanks, of course, to John Duffy for providing us music to open and close each episode. And remember to rate, review, and subscribe. And tell your friends about us. So, we'll be back next week with more. Thanks for listening.